Coming up on Theatre Talk.
I do think there's an element of sort of moral, social and personal compromise that all the characters have made, no matter what their gender. And I think that's what makes them so relatable to, you know, over the length of time that Chekhov was writing and into the present day, is that we're all sort of broken and sticky taped, sellotaped back together as human beings. And that's a wonderful area to play in as an actor.
Theatre Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation and the Honorable Thomas Mercer Ray. From New York City, this is Theatre Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. Now, you know, Susan, I'm a big Chekhov fan, but there's a play Chekhov wrote early in his career, Platonov, that you never see.
I never saw it.
I've never seen it either, but it has been adapted into a play called The Present, a really fascinating, terrific play on Broadway now, and two colossally good performances. With us tonight, Cate Blanchett and Richard Roxburgh, the stars of The Present. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Cate, your husband adapted Platonov.
Yes.
Did you know that he was capable of adapting a Russian masterpiece into a play?
No, Andrew and I have run the Sydney Theatre Company together. I did it for sort of 5 years, and Andrew did it for almost 10. Mm-hmm. And in his last season, he'd had this long line of Russian investigation with the late great Howard Davies at the National Theatre in London. And originally, Howard had talked to him about getting this broken fragment of a work, which is Chekhov's first play, rejected by an actress and locked away forever, you know, till the 20s, I think, 1920s. Yeah. And so Andrew did a working of it for Howard, and then there was a change of guard at the National, and that didn't occur, but it stayed with Andrew. And then we'd been talking to John Crowley for a long time, who directed this, about coming to work at the Sydney Theatre Company. And he and Andrew got talking, and Andrew said, look, I want to rework it and update it. Mm. And then he placed it into a midlife crisis, and he also placed it into Russia in the 1990s, which I think has given it great relevance, actually.
It's so fascinating that you see key Chekhov points in this earliest play, like a midlife crisis, and so many themes that feed through Chekhov.
Yeah, what did you make of this play when it came to you? Did you know an earlier version?
I'd read an early, I mean, I'd read 1,000 years ago, Platonov, and it's a play that, you know, it's kind of tedious even to read, let alone to see, because...
Not this version.
I opened it with some trepidation, you know, because you think, okay, well, where can you go with an adaptation? They did a very good one in the, I think it was the 1990s, called Wild Honey.
Wild Honey, yeah.
David Hare did.
Michael Frayn translated.
Yes.
Oh, Michael Frayn, yeah.
And Michael scenes of that at drama school.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, when I started reading this particular version of it, I was just kind of thrown against the wall. It really, you know, blew my hair back, because it was alarmingly explosive and different. Mm-hmm. But it had all of those kind of intrinsic Chekhov elements, and had so many of the beautiful things that we've discovered about Chekhov and Chekhov's characters over the years, you know, because we've done quite a few of these now.
Yeah. And what's going on in this play when it opens? I mean, it's Chekhov in the sense, a lot of people gathering on a long table, drinking a lot, and nobody seems particularly happy. I mean,
Welcome to
It's hilarious. Well, it's set, I play Anna Petrovna, who was married to a great and important general. Right. And there's been a group of men around her. She was much younger than him, and she sort of inherited his son. So she had a son who was a stepson who was almost the same age as her, fell in love but never consummated a relationship with a very eligible bachelor, played by Richard Platonov, and then various other people. So she's gathered them all together on the weekend to celebrate her 40th birthday, and they haven't seen each other for forever, for at least a decade, and to sort of see what's going to happen. And
what could possibly go wrong?
Shocking Thanksgiving dinner, it doesn't always go as
it goes
per plan.
Yes,
I mean, she seems very perverse from the beginning in the way she's brought in these people.
There is something of the chess player about her, though, the kind of arranging of people. And I mean, you know...
Is that why the play starts with chess?
Well, I suspect so.
Yes.
I mean, there's certainly that element of... Toby Schmidt's character, Nikolai, accuses her of treating people like chess pieces at the end. And so there's something of that about her, of the kind of wanting to move people around and make shapes with them.
A Chekhov scholar said to me that there's always these women in Chekhov who've had to settle, that the role of the women is such that, you know, their lives are constructed by men, and your character, for example, she's trying to get her money in place, and she's got options of men she's trying to get, but they're all kind of
There's a
not
wonderful
very
line
good.
that a character, Sofia Yegorovna, says to Platonov, is, "You're a man, you can make choices." And I think that to hear that as a woman now, in 2017, it still does ring true to a certain degree. It's not just back when Chekhov wrote it, but I do think there's an element of sort of moral, social and personal compromise that all the characters have made, no matter what their gender. And I think that's what makes them so relatable to, you know, over the length of time that Chekhov was writing and into the present day, is that we're all sort of broken and sticky taped, sellotaped back together as human beings. And that's a wonderful area to play in as an actor, because there's a lot of absurdity and a lot of tragedy, you know, in the little seams that we sort of piece ourselves together and try and appear whole.
Yeah, one of the other things that comes through in this play, and Chekhov will, of course, expand later on in his works, is the sense of people who do love each other, but are fated not really to be able to be together. And there's still that yearning and that longing that they have for each other, but they're with somebody else, they couldn't be together. Just life conspires to keep them apart.
Yeah, life conspires, but I also think in a sense we conspire. Well, certainly my character, the character that I play, Mikhail, conspires against himself in a sense. I mean, he finally says, I can't do this with you because I can't spoil it. So it's this idea that if only you could grab a hold in the present moment of this thing and make it manifest, surely that would be the greatest thing that you could do in this life. But it's also the most difficult to do, because what if it doesn't work?
Right.
What if you make a mess of it?
No, your character seems hell-bent on self-destruction, doesn't he?
He does.
And he also has an alcohol problem.
he really
Might be a Chekhov play where there's not somebody with alcohol problem.
But your relationship is such, I was so riveted by the both of you. As soon as your characters are together on stage, I was mesmerized because you transmitted the relationship right away. It was so stunning. You know, we don't
acting.
learn of it.
Right.
No,
That's
we
something
don't
been
learn
doing
of it in
can't
the
stand
script.
one.
several months on Broadway.
Yes, yes.
There's a great
you.
moment in Act 3 when we come together and everything is kind of completely stripped away. I mean,
Yes.
the stage is really stripped away, and without giving too much away, it's a moment of kind of synthesis, or a moment of kind of where everything is inspissated into this kind of perfect, really beautifully constructed scene, I think. Andrew's done a really beautiful job with it, where we actually speak the truth to one another. And so much of the time in Chekhov, what's wonderful about it is that you know that people are saying things at complete cross purposes, and it happens all the time in this play, and it happens all the time in Chekhov. People are not necessarily saying what they really think a lot of the time, but in this instance, in this moment, there's this beautiful moment where there's a coming together, and it's very special. It's very special always to play that.
Now, I'm not giving anything away by saying that there is a gun in it, because there's a gun in a lot of Chekhov plays. But I was rather amused at the way Andrew handled the gun. There are a number of guns in this play.
Yes.
Was that on his mind when he was adapting? We have to deal with it, because you introduce a gun in a Chekhov play. It is going to be used, but not for a long time.
Yes, I mean, that actually came from a version of Hedda Gabler we did together. And in the production in Sydney, well, I was on stage as the audience was
Very
arriving.
different.
Very different. And actually shot the gun as soon as the lights went
In the
out.
beginning.
And I think he'd loved watching me be on stage and shoot a gun. So, but then we decided that wasn't maybe the best way to start it. So the gun's got a slightly different use, but it carries history.
Yeah.
It's because the general is much talked about, but obviously has passed away. And
That reminds me of Hedda Gabler, too, because Hedda Gabler is always thinking about her father, who was the general.
Yes.
It's her pistols that she
Yes.
uses.
Yes. It's very, very hard to live up to the memory of someone great and dead.
Yeah, precisely. There was a production years ago. We had a guy named Charles Ludlam who had the Ridiculous Theater Company here, which was very famous off-Broadway, quite camp thing, and he did everything in drag. He did a production of Hedda Gabler, plain Hedda, complete, and it did it straight. By that I mean a serious production of Hedda Gabler until the very end when Hedda goes off to kill herself and plays the piano. He played Anything Goes and shot himself.
That's perfect.
Isn't that? I think that's
perfect.
But I was put in mind somewhat of that when I was watching The Present, because it's a very funny play, and I think the mistake people have about Chekhov is it's going to be really long and really sad. And these people who are sad in life, they are cutting loose, though, at this dinner party. They are trying to grab what little life there is left for them to make use of it.
When we were working with Thomas Ascher, wonderful Hungarian director, on Vanya, and Andrew did the version that we worked from, he said, the people speak in a very blunt way. And often when Chekhov is translated into English, they want to bring all this sort of eccentric lyricism that they think the Russians speak in. But in fact, people say very blunt things, but they try to say them in poetic ways. So allow the actors to act the ripples and just write as if you're throwing a stone into the pond, and the actors will be the ripples. And I think that's Andrew's really taken that into this. I mean, there's a lot of overlapping dialogue that's incredibly rhythmic and true to the way we all actually speak, which makes it feel much more modern. But it's quite blunt.
What was the reason, Richard, to put it in the 90s? I mean, what are you thinking about it going on in Russia at this time that you think this play works in that decade?
I think
after the Cold War, the wall has fallen.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a time of great sort of foment and change, obviously, as most times are in Russia, for God's sake.
Yeah.
But, at the time that Chekhov was writing, it was, there was so many things. There was the groundswell of so many things that came to pass, obviously, a short time later. And so it was a time of great change. You could feel the sort of knuckles of change, of the machinery of change being put in place. And so I think that Andrew's idea was to try and fix a moment in time that had some greater immediacy to us, that we could bounce off with a lot more ease. But it was also a time of great political change, and so it's set in the time of the rise of the oligarchs in Russia, and since the time that we did this production in Sydney 18 months ago.
The oligarchs have really cemented their power.
Wow. There's all these lines, there's all these references in this production that suddenly have this kind of extraordinary currency that none of us could have
Well, I thought, too, this notion of dislocation in the play, because in the 90s you have the communists who had run everything. If you were connected in the party, you had really all the power. But that is now going to shift and change, and some people are going to begin to lose power while these other people are going to be coming up.
Yes.
To get more power. And there's a sense, I thought, that pervades the play, that these people's positions in their world are not as secure as they once thought they were.
Yes, but there's also, it's a very sort of different mindset to the one that we grew up with in Australia, having sort of been sort of inculcated in a society that's been inherently democratic. Mm-hmm. Whereas Russia's never had that democratic history. And we watched this really interesting documentary, I think it was a 4-part documentary called Putin and the Oligarchs, which was it really, for the first time, I was sort of really understanding a very, very different way of understanding interpersonal relationships as well as political relationships. And something that someone said was that we knew that the person who was lying to us knew we knew that they were lying. We knew we were being lied to, and we all accepted that it was the truth. Yeah. I'm saying that now in America, the way the world is going, you suddenly think, how different is this to the environment that we're describing and saying is other? You know, it's politically at its extremes, communism and monopoly capitalism are very, very similar.
Well,
and the notion of living in a society which you're lied to politically, it does have an influence on the way you deal with people personally.
So your title could be a pun.
Yes.
Well, but if you live in that society as these characters live in, where everything that is told to them is a lie.
Yes.
It does crush any sense of idealism in you sooner or later.
Yes.
Because
and there's a great line that
Alexei.
says. He says, to trying to calm Mikhail down, he says, all clear. He said, all clear, it's the only way. He said, we forget what we've just said.
Right.
We're not going to talk about it. It's the only way.
That's right, all
So
clear.
it's the only way to deal with kind of political and social trauma sometimes, is to just pretend it doesn't exist.
Have either one of you worked in Russia? Have you done any movies there or any plays there? Are you?
No, would love to.
Yeah, I would love to.
This could. I wonder if you could. Somebody could
I
translate
probably think
Andrew's.
it was too short. Thomas, when he directed
Yeah.
Vanya, he said
Yeah.
he loved it. It was so energetic and buoyant and left of field, the work with him. And he said he's rarely invited to Russia because people think he does Chekhov too quickly. And he said the productions are sort of 3.5, maybe 4 hours long, but you do the Seagull with the Marley, and it's like 6, 7, 8
7 or 8
hours long. Oh my God.
We did Vanya 3 years running. So we did it in Sydney, then we took it to Washington the next year, then we took it to New York the year after that. And doing a play as beautiful as Uncle Vanya, 3 years running, each time we did it, it just got so much better, so much things just dropped into this kind of extraordinary deep place. And every time, I would argue, it became more beautiful and probably simpler in a way, but more profound. And so you really understood, these Russian companies that do go into a rehearsal for 8 months. Because, I mean, originally, I would have always thought, what the hell are you going to do after the first 6 weeks? But if the material is so rich and such a deep pond.
That's the thing. I don't know if you found this, but I find Chekhov, and having done a few of them now, it's absolutely excruciating to rehearse, because
Excruciating for you, so oh my God, let's get on with this, or just complicated?
No, because the work is so rich, the relationships are so rich, but it's not really until you've been running it for a while. And that's the gift that we have in this production, is that Australia can't support a company culture because our audience pool is comparatively small.
Right.
But we have a stable of actors that is, just by its very nature, we've all worked together several times in various different iterations. And so working together over time means that you're able to stand and be on the stage without having to show or display. And I think that's what you're referring to, is that you're able to strip things away.
Right, and these Chekhov plays were written for companies of actors who had worked together, in repertory, in plays all the time. They knew each other extremely well, and that, I think, adds a kind of layer and texture to these plays if you've all spent a lot of time together. In
Yes.
Absolutely. No, it really does. I
But
think.
why is the rehearsal excruciating? I've still lost that.
Because you're at the beginning,
I see.
when the only way you can do it is to be in the middle or the end. So you can't, only time will give you the gift of being able to do Chekhov well,
Yeah.
I think.
Richard, you're going to say?
Yeah, there's just a consciousness of saying lines.
Yes.
When you first set off on the sort of Chekhov round the world voyage, and slowly, over time, that becomes about something else, and the lines drop away, and it becomes about sort of states of being more. So you could almost there's a certain point you could almost dispense with the lines, and
Just be.
I'm not arguing we should do that, though.
Be much shorter.
Is it a better performance in a Chekhov play if you're an older actor? Do you bring something to it as an older actor than if you were a young actor in college? Are these the kind of plays that you have to have had a little life behind you before you begin?
Well, there's various different archetypes. If you look at the Sonia archetype, who sort of appears in various different guises, and the Arkadna archetype. It's like when you look at Arkadna, it's sort of like Hedda Gabler or Blanche. Often actresses don't approach that role until they're approaching 50, when in fact she's only 31. And Hedda Gabler's very young.
That's true.
And Arkadna's very young. But because you need to have enough life experience, really. I don't know. I mean, you could be a 40-year-old who could be incredibly mannered, or you could be a very open 40-year-old who's prepared to, because you have to work. Some people go on and give a performance. you know, the wonderful thing about working with every single actor on the stage in this particular company is where I think it's the quality of listening. And that's the stuff you need to play with. It's not necessarily hours on stage, although it doesn't hurt.
You did the most wonderful Blanche I've ever seen. Do you harmonize with that as you're performing this role?
I didn't want to play it because I didn't want it to be me giving my. I'm not interested in giving my whatever. You know, I think nothing could be more boring, frankly.
You're Cate Blanchett.
Yes, far more boring. But when we talked to Liv Ullmann about doing it, then it became really exciting. Because, I mean, I thought, wow, she has so many qualities of Blanche and is such an extraordinary director. And obviously, I'm such an admirer of hers as an actress. So that was, to be in dialogue with her then became interesting.
Years ago, I saw Jessica Lange do Blanche on Broadway with Alec Baldwin.
Yes.
She did not get
in the theatre, I think that
at the
was.
Barrymore. She was at the Barrymore.
Gregory Moshe.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, Alec took his shirt off, and all the critics went crazy. So he got the reviews, and she didn't get great reviews. But I saw that play, and I was, I think, at the fourth row. If you were close for that performance, it was a heartbreaking performance.
Yes,
she
I'm
was
sure
not
she's
done
a
justice
wonderful
by the critics, and maybe it took a while to translate to the theater. And I heard she got better. I saw it early on, but if you were up close to her, it was a beautiful, tender, sad and terrifying performance.
I wonder, and this is a question for you, knowing Broadway much better than we do. Do you think Broadway is built for that type of analysis, so that they're always looking for the star? Or do they, you know, are they ready to embrace ensemble work?
Certainly market it to the star.
Yes, I don't think in the history of Broadway you're going to find much ensemble work the way you're going to find in a nonprofit or repertory theater, because Broadway has always been star-driven. It's not a new thing to have stars on Broadway. I mean, you know, Mary Martin was a star, Ethel Merman was a star, and they wrote shows for the stars. And the way I think the economics of Broadway are, it's for-profit, so you can't really afford to have a company of actors and to keep them together for a long time, because they're going to peel away, they're going to get better offers, and other producers are going to be able to pay more for them. But you could, and there's talk about this, somehow creating a national theater in one of these Broadway theaters, because God knows the Schuberts and the Nederlanders are making plenty of money off things like Miss Saigon and Wicked, and you could take one of the playhouses on Broadway and try to create a national theater there that will allow all sorts of actors, some stars, some not stars, but good actors to come together and do 4 or 5 great plays.
That'd be a fantastic idea.
But there's
and that could plant the flag of that
for a
idea.
long time, has there?
And then it could be, all right, Cate Blanchett wants to do, with Richard, they want to do Uncle Vanya for 4 weeks, or they want to do Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But again, you guys have the relationship, you've worked before.
So you'd bring the company in.
You could bring a company in.
As soon as someone peeled away, then they're not selling the tickets, and that's why they have these limits.
It's real estate.
I just wanted to quickly ask you, you've both done a lot of film work. You've won 2 Oscars, but do you prefer the stage because of this ability, you know, that you can go into a more deep experience as you run the thing more and more?
I had a very interesting experience working with Woody Allen on a film called Blue Jasmine.
Yes.
And I had played, not that long before, had played Blanche. And I thought, oh, well, his casting person must have seen that. That's why when I read the script, I thought, there's so many parallels.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, but he didn't want to talk about it. And so he hadn't seen it, didn't want to talk about it. But it really helped me perform in the film because I had lived that role through over several seasons. And there's something about the time one spends on stage that you can, if it's a well-rehearsed play, and if, as Richard was referring to, the roles are rich, then by the time you get to the end of the run, it's so much deeper and richer than it was at the beginning. And so I relish the time spent with the other actors and having an ownership of the space and having that direct relationship with your audience. But I love film, but I mean, if gun to my head, speaking of this play, then it would be the theatre.
I guess you can have more control over your performance, though, in the theater, because it's you every night doing it, and the director sometimes leaves, whereas with the movie, ultimately the director's going to pick the take that he wants.
I mean, arguably,
it's
not really actor's medium, it's everybody else apart from, I suppose. But yes, you're in charge of the kind of the nightly voyage out into the sort of substance of the stuff, and so that is it's a much heavier workload in every sense for an actor, and therefore more satisfying in that way, really.
And who was our friend who did Long Day's Journey tonight with Vanessa?
Oh, Brian Denny.
As Brian Denny, he said, when you're doing a movie, they call you and they say, the car will pick you up at 4 o'clock. Would you like skim milk or 2% milk with your coffee? They treat you like you're 4 years old. The
No,
theater,
you do get infantilized in the film.
and he said in the theater, the rehearsal's at 5 o'clock. Get your there. Boom.
Yeah. but we come from Australia, and it's a very non-hierarchical way of making films. So
So you're not part of that.
You still get treated badly. You get treated badly. Every medium in Australia.
it's a pleasure being here.
It's a pleasure to be on Broadway, right? All right, the play is called The Present at the Ethel Barrymore Theater. Fascinating play, especially if you love Chekhov. Very well adapted by your husband, Andrew Upton, starring Cate Blanchett and Richard Roxburgh. Like Edinburgh, I finally got it right. Not Roxbury, not Roxburgh, which you probably get all over New York.
Yes.
Roxburgh.
Roxburgh.
All right. Thank you very much for being our guest tonight
Thank
on
you so much.
Theater Talk.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you,